Is it? Anyway, I've been this is going to be basically a show and tell from me. I'm showing some clips of films that I've done over the last 25 years that have been called everything from experimental to hybrid and now animated documentary. I'm not going to talk so much about what, but about why. I've done a lot of other films that may also fall into this category, but I think I chose these four because they most clearly speak to each other as to how the process went along. Bear with me, I'm not a PC girl, but this was back in the late 80s. I wanted to make a film about this person that I met who had a very traumatic thing happened to her. She was gunned down by her ex-fiancé who killed himself in this unsuccessful murder-suicide, and the case went to court and it helped change the gun laws in Ontario in Canada. And just to go back a second, my background is really in English literature, so I'm interested in narrative, I'm interested in story, and I really do believe that the personal is political, and my work is all basically biography, I guess, biography and memoir, and so that lends itself to a variety of different interpretations. I'm not a journalistic filmmaker at all. And so because I have an English, background in English lit, I tell stories, and because I happen to be trained as an animator, I tell stories often as animation, as a tool or as a narrative device, because that's who I am, that's what I do. So anyway, back to her story, I thought that she'd have to trust me before I was allowed to make a film about her, so I decided to do something autobiographical about two pretty hard subjects about getting raped and run over. And so I was thinking, how do you get people to look at this kind of stuff? How do you let people come closer? And I thought you could do it, through humor and also through different types of representation. So anyway, I thought I'd show you a clip. This is from 1989. It's called You Take Care Now. Let's hope this works.
Should probably turn the mic off before.
That's the only one. That's exciting, that's my last one.
I'm starting now. Close your eyes and think of a hotel room in Brindisi. You're sitting at a desk looking out the window onto the street below. It's siesta time and there's not a lot going on out there. You're writing an entry in your journal. If you're having trouble visualizing, it looks like this. You've been traveling on a train for the past 3 days from Switzerland on down to the heel of Italy, trying to make it to Greece before your Eurail pass expires. You haven't washed or slept in all that time. It's early in the morning and you have all day to wait for your night boat to the Peloponnesus. The friend you met on the train has gone back to some other town to pick up a machine part you forgot. It's September. Tourist season is over. And you're alone in a city everyone has been telling you is the armpit of the world. The travel agent takes pity on you and offers you his place to crash, have a shower, store your stuff. He calls a cab to take you there. The driver knows the place. Oh, I almost forgot. You're female, and you're 22. So, you're writing after a lunch of fresh steamed prawns and enough coffee in your body that you feel yourself burning inside. You're in his room. You want to leave, but you just can't think. button and the first fire starts. Now, the next bit is a little hard to explain. You get the idea, don't you? You get raped. Now, you're lying there, waiting for something violent to happen, to be hit or beaten, or for yourself to do something like scream or fight or maybe pull out that ever-handy Swiss Army knife. But nothing like that passes, because you're afraid you might hurt him, or you're afraid he might get angry and hurt you, or he'll call the police and tell them that you stole something and you don't speak Italian, and you've heard all about the police. And you lie there, passive and violated, feeling like someone told you you were going to win an award, and then you didn't get it. Except the award was your dignity, your sanity, your middle-class inviolability. It was taken away and given to someone else who never made the mistake of going to a hotel room in a strange place with a strange man. And all you were worried about was how to get out of there with your luggage intact, how to avoid upsetting this man who not only had a black belt in Taekwondo, but also had your ticket for the boat out of that nightmare land, and how to get somewhere safe to sleep. God, you wanted to sleep so bad. But he told you you looked just like the Gioconda, and she hasn't closed her eyes in over 400 years. So you take a picture of yourself so that you can remember what the Mona Lisa looks like when she realizes Leonardo was just another ledge. Outside again,
Okay, that's it for that. Also, this was a time when, in terms that in terms of digital, Sony had just come out with its 8mm video camera that we got to beta test in art school, and so I was just using everything, sort of like kitchen sink that I had at my fingertips to throw in to try and make. The quality of this isn't so good, so you can't see. I mean, it's a film; it's not a video, and so in the film you can see the difference in the textures. I was trying to play around with digital versus analog technology, and how could you actually see that and make it more visceral on the screen. I'm just going to bumble along to the other films. Now, the film that I wanted to make, which I'm going to show you now, I wanted to just make this very simple dichotomy between this horrible event that happened that you usually see in a newspaper, and you relegate it to the land of myth and make-believe. And this is a very short clip, and then I'll just talk about it later. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll tell you about how I broke up with him. I've got this. I went with a boyfriend named Albert, and he was in my first grade. Two virgins, bad sex. The story. And I took the pressure on him to buy me an engagement ring because, everybody else in school who wasn't mustached had an engagement ring and was getting engaged that year. So, we never really talked about marriage, but, we knew that, so at some point in the future we were going to go out and buy tacky flat furniture and go live in an apartment somewhere. So, that was what engagement. And when we broke up, I just kind of cut him off, and I remember he came over that day, and he had bought me a stereo for one Christmas. It was like the equivalent of a close and play, and he wanted it back. And he said, told me I could keep the ring, but, could he have the stereo? And, he could have the ring back. It was a diamond that had a great big black carbon flaw in the middle. So, anyway, he got the ring and I got the stereo. And, next time I saw Albert, now he phoned me a few times, and I just couldn't stand the sight of them. I had no experience in breaking off with people, relationships. I just thought, you just stop seeing them and that's it, and that's what I did, and it was worked fine for about, 2 months. And then he started phoning, and I just couldn't stand the sound of his voice or the look of him, So I just, was curt on the phone, and so then that was getting worse, so he started coming around a bit. And would come by my work sometimes and try to run me over, come by my house and start big fights, It's the average,
In that film, I mean, like obviously these are very low budget films. They're very low budget, and so I'm working with, you know, just hands-on with what's ever there. And I happened to be walking along the street one day, and I saw this shards of auto glass everywhere. There'd just been a really bad accident, and there was beautiful, beautiful clumps of glass everywhere. And I decided that would be a great thing to use. I'm also using stained glass, but chunking up the glass so that these shards that are going around this, you know, very happy image of this, you know, little fairy woman are actually quite dangerous. I mean, it looks nice, but it has this theme of violence, and the actual auto glass is in there, which carries with it the residues of this other story that we don't know about. I'm really just going to race because I just would rather have you see the stuff, because the films are really what they are, what this is. So several years later, that was in 1990. I'm going to go for this one, LTS. I made a film about my great-grandfather, who's a traveling Chinese vaudevillian acrobat magician that I knew nothing about. But I happened to come into some home movie, some 16mm home movie. Okay, let's watch it and I'll talk about it later.
This is my great-grandfather, Long Tack Sam. I never met him, never knew much about him. Maybe that's an immigrant thing, not passing on stories. But he seems to be trying to tell me something here, and now I wish I could hear what he's saying. China, but I'd only seen pictures of him wearing Western clothes. I knew he was very short and liked to smoke a big cigar. And I knew he was a magician. He could make coins appear from behind your ear. Oh, and that he knew Ed Sullivan and Jack Benny and Orson Welles. And he worked with Laurel and Hardy and George Burns and Gracie Allen and Cary Grant. So he was in show business. So what? Who was he exactly?
Let me talk about Long Tack Sam, who was one of the biggest acts in American vaudeville.
Mrs. Samantha, I know the history of the
can't really compete with me.
this is in America.
With a magician, you know, it's Chinese. Everybody would get that point. Well, he was super.
He's a myth.
Yeah, he's a myth. Yeah, he's very famous.
I knew he was very short. Now, I knew he was very big. A magician, an acrobat, with a world-traveling full Chinese review. If he was so famous, why is he forgotten? Why doesn't my family even talk about him anymore? Where did he come from? I went to talk to his son, my great-uncle, who, I realized, I had never asked a personal question to as an adult in my life.
I know nothing about his family at all. I don't know his background at all, and he never wanted to talk about it.
In fact, there was nobody in my family who knew. But once upon a time, Long Tack Sam shared his story with the world.
When I was 5 years old, the famine came to our North Chinese country. We were hungry and miserable. A magician came working near me. He was a famous friend of the spirits. His name was Wang. He could take needles out of his mouth for half an hour at a time. He could make beautiful vases appear in the middle of the door. He could perform 100 magic feats. I said to myself, surely he can turn stones into bread. I went and bowed before the magician Wang and told him I was hungry and begged him to make bread for me. He squatted in a public Square and replied that there were marvels that the spirits would allow to be worked only before adepts. He sometimes performed the mysterious and terrible rite of conjuring breath, but only in the presence of his pupils or of wizards of high degree. I begged him to take me as one of his pupils. He agreed and had me take him to my parents. They gladly bound me over to so great a man in so wondrous a profession. Wang taught me the art of Chinese necromancy. The Chinese magician undergoes a long and arduous training. He begins as a child and studies until he has reached manhood and adepthood. And then he sallies forth and displays his certificate of graduation and works his part on street corners, in the popular theaters, and in the palaces of the mandarins. Upon my graduation, I joined a Western circus performing in China, and when they returned to the Occident, I went with them. I will not see China again for 20 years.
Poverty, transformation, adventure, what a story! But was it true? I was determined to find out. To paraphrase the great bard Bob Marley, you have to know where you come from so you can know where you're going to. I come from a restless family who live all over the world.
And this is also a restless crowd. I only have 5 minutes left, so I was going to show you a little bit more. But the fact is that I spent years trying to look for this footage that didn't exist. And animation started off as a strategy for me to have something with images, where the artifacts that I was capturing along the way. But it worked in 2 other ways. It worked, what were they? It worked because he had a variety act. He was a magician and a comic and an acrobat, and he had this, and he traveled with this huge troupe, and they sort of did a variation of the theme every year. They went around and just changed some little things, they add things, and it was really like sort of like a montage. This whole idea of you doing different styles of animation actually suited his act quite well, and also, of course, I'd never met my great-grandfather, but that animation was exactly our connection. The first films, were made, or some of them were made by the collaboration between photographers and magicians, and so that this was actually, his legacy to me. And because I made this film, which is the National Film Board approached me to adapt a book by Bernice Eisenstein called I Was a Child of Holocaust Survivors, and I'd never done an adaptation of someone else's work before. And I think that it was because of Long Tack Sam and my way of using animation and live action and this whole thing, but different types of recreation. That's how the film was supposed to be, but instead it looks like this, and I will tell you why after you see this little excerpt. Okay.
It is 1961 and I'm 11 years old. Adolf Eichmann is on trial in Israel. And in our rec room, 100 dead is catastrophe. 1 million dead, a statistic. I'd always known that my parents were survivors of the Holocaust, but until today, its relationship to me had remained invisible. Suddenly, I am injected with the white heat rush of a new reality. The Holocaust is a drug, and I've entered an opium den, being given my first taste for free, innocently, by everyone here. I've only just glimpsed its power, scanning the trail of needle marks on the left forearm of each person in the room. This is where my addiction takes hold. I will discover there is no end to the dealers I can find for just one more hit. One more hallucinatory entry into the world of ghosts. Will we never get any rest? My parents don't even know they're...
Yeah. Like all of these films, obviously, I mean, they're all constructions from the first one, which seems like a confessional. I mean, it's a construction. And for New Shoes, I particularly wanted to show you know, to put this story into this land of make-believe as a commentary. You know, and in Long Tak Sam, like some of the animation I did, the comic books, Long Tak Sam told many, many different stories about his life, all different versions, and so we came up with this thing in the style of the golden age of comics, the 30s, when he was at his height, and told it again and again and again. But for this story, I mean, this is memoir, but there's a lot of people who have not, they do not believe or they have not heard. There's a generation of people of the Holocaust, right? And I did not want under any circumstances for people to think that this was just a story. And I thought it was really important to use some of the footage that, you know, if you're a certain age, being burnt into your imaginations and memories of the Holocaust and all that documentation. And I tried to put it in here, and it was so disruptive to the sensibility of the original work, of Bernice's original illustrated memoir. It just seemed very, very wrong, and it became a totally animated piece. Again, I'm working with different artists with different styles, but we just thought that we had to keep the integrity of her piece. You know, that was tantamount, and so it was the opposite. It was like removing potential document artifacts to create a more coherent truth.
And also, I think it's worth saying that this film is part of the animated shorts showing tomorrow at the festivals. Anyone here will get a chance to see it.
Right, and I could go on, but I really want to keep it to time. Yay. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Marie. And next, always set up technology. We've got Sam Moore talking. Her paper's called Does This Look Right? Working inside collaborative brain.
It's so exciting not to have to explain what an animated documentary is before I start. I feel like I've come home. So I'm having this
Right, so a caveat to start with. Oh yeah, sorry. Caveat to start with. This is, I'm just finishing my first year PhD as part of my PhD study, and this is stuff that I'm wrestling with as a filmmaker of a bit more standard, of like sort of a bit more history than with my PhD. So this is presented as kind of work in progress, thoughts in progress. That's just to cover my arse in case I say something really offensive and then we start shouting saying, work in progress. Okay. Okay, as filmmakers, we often start with the question, why use animation for this project? Why make animation in the documentary genre? What is it specifically that only animation can document? In the process of trying to answer this last question, I've looked at one of the things that animation can attempt to document, the inside of somebody else's head. In order to climb inside somebody else's head, you may imagine that collaboration might be necessary. And so I've been thinking about the idea of the collaborative frame. What is it? Why would we need one? How would we use it, and how would we work within it? The films that I'm going to be discussing in terms of the collaborative frame are films which, as Paul Wells described from the original definition by House and Batchelor, they are in a penetrative mode. He says penetration is essentially a revelatory tool used to reveal conditions or principles which are hidden or beyond the comprehension of the viewer. So the films that I'm discussing all attempt to use animation in a non-fiction way to communicate the internal experiences of the subject of the film, but not the filmmakers themselves. They all deal with different kinds of internal experiences, but all attempt a collaborative approach to the gathering, authentication, and communication of the experiences, from being an artist with Down syndrome to having the brain trait of synesthesia. In my animated documentary practice, the collaborative nature of what goes on inside the frame and how to develop a methodology for that collaboration is something that increasingly interests me. My work in non-fiction animation has always included aspects of collaboration with the subjects by necessity. For example, Doubled Up, which was a 2004 film that I made for the Anime Scheme, which was about multiple births. It was semi-autobiographical and included many images by my twin sons, who were 2 at the time, as well as their voices and the voice of Jane Denton, head of the Multiple Births Foundation. I used images that my sons had made in the visuals of the film to underscore the verbal contribution that they made on the soundtrack, and to include them in the visual layering of the film, which was itself about the layering of roles and identities in the artistic process. However, it wasn't until I made An Eyeful of Sound in 2010 that I really began to address what it meant to collaborate with the subject on the outcome of the film in its entirety, not just on the soundtrack. And that image is made up of collaborative images from 3 different people, and all of those, I know it looks abstract, but in the context of the film it comes from 3 different sources. In researching this aspect of making animated documentaries, I'm indebted to filmmakers Shira Avni and Tim Ware, both of whom have been more than generous in sharing insights into how they have gone about grappling with the issues that I'm discussing here. So what's the problem? What's the problem that a collaborative frame might be the answer to? When making a non-fiction animation that represents another person's experience, the image itself can become a problematic area, even in the most straightforward so-called animated radio documentaries. Do you replicate a talking head-style visual from live-action documentaries? And if so, why should you animate it at all? Do you illustrate what they say? And if so, are you really representing what they meant? In Dennis Tupakov's film, His Mother's Voice, he explores the way in which changing the visuals to the same soundtrack can alter the audience's perception of the film subtly but forcefully. Animated documentary can be potent when presenting a subjective mode of documentary, often in an autobiographical context. It can also be convincing when making what Bella Honest-Rowe calls a mimetic substitution for footage that would be impossible to capture any other way than by remaking it and representing it. But when an indexical subjective soundtrack is combined with a referential objective image, then the role of the filmmaker in choosing what to present can become more ambiguous. Bill Nichols' dilemma that the distinctive formulation of the camera's and filmmaker's presence as absence, so common to classical narrative, poses problems of a peculiar nature in documentary, is increased when not only the filmmaker but the subject of the film is present and yet absent from the frame. How can the audience know whether or not the image that they are seeing is mediated beyond all recognition from the subject's original intent when being interviewed? As Keith Dryson pointed out, animated documentary offers the filmmaker the opportunity to add extra information about reality to the frame. So where does this extra information come from and how is it gathered? Okay, so what do I mean by a collaborative frame? The term collaboration is a meaningful one to a lot of contemporary filmmaking, from the context of collaborative or crowdfunding, for example, The Age of Stupid, to using collaborative methods to generate plots and ideas. These 2 images here on the left are taken from the Finnish Star Wreck series. I don't know if you've seen them, they're brilliant. 1992 to 2005. And also there's image here from 1 Second Film, which is also a collaborative effort, not only collaborative funding, but also collaborative plot and ideas. So it's farming it out to the internet, saying, right, what should we do? In the context I will be talking about today, however, my idea of collaboration is more intrinsic to the materiality of the frame, inside the frame itself. The type of film that this approach would be most useful to, I would suggest, is the subjective, where the information being communicated is from the perspective of someone else from the inside, as Shira Avni describes it. The collaborative frame is the antithesis of the animated radio documentary, where an indexical soundtrack is recorded and taken away to be animated separately. A collaborative frame would be one where the subject of the interview has an opportunity to have input into the image as well as the soundtrack by drawing the imagery themselves, having the imagery based on their drawings or based on their descriptions of imagery. Another key component to my definition would be the opportunity of the subject of the film to feed back on the ways in which the film is developed through comment and discussion on work in progress. Filmmaker Shira Avni has explicitly worked on collaborative animation in the Down syndrome community since 2001. She's described how working in this way allows a voice and a creative empowerment to be given to an often ignored community. She says about the 2009 film, Tying Your Own Shoes, the goal of the film is to show what it's like to experience Down syndrome from the inside, rather than through the lens of family or caregivers or the medical community or teachers. Tim Webb has talked about how ASV Autism, which in the film is subtitled A Collaboration, was commissioned by Channel 4 largely on the basis of its collaborative approach, but He says, finding artists and other collaborators who wanted to be involved was quite difficult to start with due to finding professionals in societies willing to help and support the project aims. This resulted in a decision to have one true animation collaborator, Daniel Sellers, who was the 9-year-old boy who contributed many of the drawings and animation sequences. My own work, An Eye Full of Sound, involved collaborating with audiovisual synesthetes, interviewing them about their synesthesia, playing sounds to them and asking them to describe, draw and identify the exact colours of their synesthetic reactions. As the process of animating their reactions progressed through still images and animated images and then composited frames and then the final edit, they had the opportunity to alter, inform and ultimately veto the representation of their experience. So why would you use a collaborative frame, which is kind of, the films we're looking at today either portray a different perspective of the world, like Tiny Red Shoes, or a different perception of the world. For example, A's for Autism and An Eye Full of Sound. Those perspectives or perceptions change the way in which the subjects of the film process the world around them. Animation is a visual medium, and although it has long been associated with the imagination and the fantastic, its visual plasticity can be used to make visually explicit this unique processing. A is for Autism uses metamorphosis between images to delicately point out Daniel's obsessive drawings of train from exactly the same angle. Tiny Red Shoes used extensive workshopping to allow the artists involved to animate distillations of their recollections and impressions of their lives. With An Eye Full of Sound, the animation was used perhaps most straightforwardly in that I was animating what they saw and the rest of us don't, an invisible yet tangible to them sensation that could be double-checked by them as easily as you might check the colour of your socks today. An illustrated radio interview might attempt to show the director's perception of the subject's words, but ultimately, unless the subject is invited into the frame, then the film will remain a third-person impression. For me, the work becomes more meaningful when the film does more than just tell us the story, but shows us too by allowing the visuals to be more than an illustrative adjunct to the indexable soundtrack. In the 3 films I'm referencing today, the fact that the subjects also made a significant contribution to the visual content of the work enhances and strengthens the claim of the film to be an authentic representation of the experience at hand. The integrity of the image as a correct representation of the experience or perspective is more meaningful to me through collaborative links than photographic ones. This is my example, okay. So as a photographic indexable image of Julie, who's one of the audiovisual synesthetes who I work with. She's lovely, she's beautiful and amazing. She plays the oboe, she works on behalf of Shellfish Rights, and she has very strong audiovisual synesthesia, none of which you particularly understand from seeing an image of her. And now I'm going to get this to play. So the reason I showed that, if I can remember, why, was just to show that the first image, the static drawing with the sound of the cockle crowing, was Julie's impression. We sort of triangulated it through three different ways, but one of the ways she talked about her reaction was to draw it, and then I animated it and sent it back to her and said, "Is this right?" And she said no, and then I did it again, and then we did it until it was right, and it was what she kind of as close as we could manage to what she'd seen. So to me, that kind of little clip of showing the cockle crowing and then showing what she sees kind of gives you so much more information. She was much more involved in the image than me taking a photo and her kind of like looking away because she's embarrassed and she doesn't like photos of herself. And you know, there's the level of engagement look quite the same. I'm certainly not saying that the two things are definitely not mutually exclusive. For example, there's the use of video diaries or the recent Kevin McLeod film, Life in a Day, where people are actively sort of like they're providing their own content, they're providing their own frame. So collaboration, working collaboratively within the frame, working photographically, are certainly not mutually exclusive. It's definitely not what I'm saying. But my point here is that an over-emphasis on indexicality can be a dead end for accurate communication of something that cannot be filmed. For example, audio-visual synesthesia or other neurological states. So how can we work within the collaborative frame, subtitled Problems? Currently I'm working on a PhD by practice looking at how unique brain states or material states can be represented through animated non-fiction. My practice currently is about prosopagnosia, which is also known as face blindness, so it's people who can't recognise faces, and phantom limb syndrome. And I'm trying to work out a way of approaching the collaborative frame with a methodology informed by my past work. I'm embarking on a cycle of interviews, image making, animation and feedback with individual subjects. Working with a collaborative frame has drawbacks. It's time consuming and therefore expensive, and it can be frustrating since it relies on so many opinions being balanced to make a whole. Shira Avenue has spoken about the production process of animation being hard to translate when working with non-animation artists. In Tying Your Own Shoes, she worked without storyboard or animatic, as the concepts of those pre-production tools, which we as animators would kind of take for granted in our planning, were hard to convey to the artists that she was working with, and they just were meaningless to them, and in the end she ditched them and worked intuitively. She ended up letting the rhythm, style and pace of her co-collaborators' working methods dictate the material gathered and made. Tim Webb talks about the problems of collaborating with a larger group. He says to have more than one animation collaboration would have resulted in missed deadlines. I think he was terrified Dick Arnold was going to kick his bum. This point is an interesting one because working collaboratively potentially opens up the director to a whole lot of opinions, perspectives and directions that may be hard to accommodate timing-wise into a commercial production. One of the interesting things I'm thinking about is how my role as a director has shifted and where it may lie in the future as a facilitator, interpreter, visualizer, or even in the therapeutic arena. The power of the edit is the final judgment of the material, what to show and what to leave out. Shira Avenue talks about the dilemma of the edit with so much material to include. Should she cut for clarity for the audience, or should she cut for authenticity for the participants? Whatever the decision made, this power remains with the director, and in that sense, the collaboration must break down slowly. Even if, as with an eye for sound and Tying Your Own Shoes, the collaborators have input and even final veto of the material, the ultimate key choices, structure, clarity, context, often rest with the director. So, to conclude, as I explained at the start of this paper, this is work / thought / practice in progress, so I can't claim to have cracked any of it. I do think, though, that if animated documentary is going to be meaningful as a genre, then we need to look at what it can uniquely bring to non-fiction films, and my suggestion is that this may be a place to look.
Thank you, Sam. And next we have Andy Frith and Robert Jefferson, who are presenting together. Sort of together. Their presentation Beyond Actuality and Animated Response.
Yes, if this is an animator's petting zoo, Andy and I are the goats, or perhaps llamas.
I'd prefer to be a llama.
There may be some spitting. Yes, we're the goats. That's it, that's the introduction. That's it. Yeah, Andy and I work at Northumbria University. I've been an animator for about 15 years, making short, independent animation films. Andy started in graphics. He started making animation films and then moved into live action title sequences and things like that. He's just joined us at Northumbria. And mainly my films are fiction, animation, narrative films. But I've approached and skirted the edges of animation documentary, which is what we're talking about today, I believe. I don't know if anybody's noticed. But really what we're going to talk about is how blurred that margin is, our edges of what is fiction, what is documentary, what is a story, what is something from reality or actuality. Is so blurred that it's very difficult to see, I think. And that's what has underpinned our conversations about the films that we're working on at the minute. And I guess it's just useful, perhaps for you today, to hear a little bit about how we've approached a couple of projects and what we're doing with them now. And the other stuff that we're going to talk about, I guess, like the actual nature of documentary animation has kind of been covered quite... Has it been covered today, Andy?
Yeah, I think so.
So we'll probably talk about the projects that we've got in front of us and hope that you find that interesting. You're going to start talking about your display cabinets.
Yeah, I'm going to try to. It's a difficult one, this, because I haven't actually started filming anything yet. So, but what I hope to do is a series of films, sociological films. And what I want to try and do is just my thought process of where I came from and where I'm sort of going to with this. So no doubt there'll be some technical problems because I need to go on the internet here. So let's see if this works. I'm going to show you sort of where I started off, because I began only using the language of animation, and then things changed. So let's see if this works first. I may have clicked the wrong button. There's two buttons here. 50-50. Yeah, I was trying to do something. I started off at the BBC, so as a graphic designer, so I only ever dealt with animation. So some animation with myself, some I just direct. It's not working, is it? Some I directed. And what happened then, due to budget restraints, clients, all sorts of other things like that, animation became very difficult. And I was pushed into an area where I had to start doing live action, and that took me into all sorts of things, drama films, documentary films, etc., etc. And animation went by. And it's partly only because of what I'm trying to do at the moment with these sociological films, Meeting Rob, and this conference actually coming up, that I started to think again of how animation could be used and how I could use animation together with some of the ideas that hopefully you'll see showed out. Brilliant. Lovely. So just to show you that I'm not a complete charlatan, which one of these buttons do I press? Is it the same one? Is it the left one or the right one on the thumb pad? Left, okay. Let's see if this works. Do I switch this off?
tuned in, hoping for a celebration of a corrupt and exploitative value system now consigned to the dustbin of history. In which case, you, my friend, are a sexually dysfunctional underachiever in severe need of sensitivity training.
So that's what I sort of used to do. So nothing documentary style there really, unless you count title sequences for documentary. Which I suppose they are, because they sort of have to sum up the program itself. Some of those were sort of some of the religious stuff, the sort of Ren and Stimpy thing was actually program content. So maybe it was sort of documentary. How do I move on? It's just an arrow. Fantastic. Recently, though, I've started to think about documentary differently. I've started to think documentary in a more artistic fashion, and as a creative thing more than anything else. Because in the past, because of clients, like I said before, you're pushed into corners, and at the moment, it's the first time I've ever sort of started to think in this way. And there's nothing academic here. This is just what I think. But people seem to be a lot less concerned with artifice and authenticity than they ever have been. And I've shown students a couple of these films recently, and it's hard to determine as a documentary whether you believe these or not. I'm not sure what the truth is in some of these films, but there is a truth there, and I think we're a lot more savvy as people, as viewers, sorry, and we're happy that they just make us think. And also, we're a lot happier that we know that there's a Northern agenda, that the hidden voice is sort of disappearing, I think, a little bit more. Thanks to maybe people like this, you know, we know if we're going to see a Michael Moore film that he's got an agenda, and we're happy to go along with that. He's not giving an equal view, particularly. And I think because of this, documentary shifted. And I think because of these four things here as well, the privatisation of the media, funding corrupts mediocrity imposed by thirst for ratings in television. And particularly the last one, I think, the flood of reality infotainment type programmes on primetime television is pushing things into the margins. Serious documentary making. And I think that's a great thing. I think that's one of the best things that could happen, because that's where creativity is, and this is where I want to try and concentrate my next few years of work. The sort of areas where animation meets art, meets documentary. So the documentaries I'm going to be making are going to be gallery based. I'm not going down any other route. I'm going to try it out and see what happens. And I think this is an interesting thing, because I think documentary itself is being seen happily as an art form now. It's been accepted. And in the past, it's been seen as the antithesis of art. But thanks to people like Francis Alice, or Alice, I don't know how to pronounce it, getting his work and working in all sorts of different mediums and working with the voice of documentary and the style of documentary, not always making documentary but using that sort of language. or very socially aware documentaries like the one on the left, I think galleries are becoming a breeding ground for very, very interesting work on the documentary front, and I think this is where animation can come in and help that along. And it's an odd thing, because in line with art, if you think about it, a good documentary forces the viewer to engage, and it has integrity, strong personal point of view. All these sort of things are the things that I want when I go to a gallery from art. So it seems like almost like a natural place now. Maybe 20 years ago it wasn't. I think nowadays it possibly is more of a natural place to find documentary. And hopefully, I think that's somewhere where animation will thrive. That's certainly what I'm trying to do over the next few years. Now, what I just want to quickly do, because I know Rob needs to get on, is see if I can get onto my e-book.
I'm not reading anything.
No. It's just the way you sat there.
Faster!
Panting. So I've done the same things I did before, is that right? I just want to show you a few pages from, I've got an e-book which is sort of a journal that I started right at the start of the thought process about a year ago of what I was going to do. And it would just help me explain a little bit better the films that I'm trying to make. I suppose I can already start. About 2 years ago, I made a documentary for a museum in Leeds, more than 2 years, 3 years ago, about back-to-back houses. What really sort of captured me about working with these back-to-back houses and trying to, I called it a portrait of a back-to-back, and it was about back-to-backs in Leeds. You don't really know the rest, but it was just interviewing people in their environments. And it was very much, I took the language of Martin Parr and that sort of ordinariness that he loves and extols, and tried to get that into the film. And there was something about that just jumped out at me, that sort of going into people's houses, letting them talk, just letting them take you along, you not giving them any direction, just letting them tell you what they wanted to tell. And what came out of this was this idea that I wanted to take it even smaller, I wanted to get it down to something more concentrated. And the idea I had was china cabinets, because a few of these people in their little houses have china cabinets, and it's
Can you just run your arms?
well, not yet. I can do that. Rob, you talk for a second, because I can't type and talk at the same time.
What should I talk about?
Anything, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You can sing.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's a chance. A chance. Come with me, and you'll see a world of pure imagination. Oh, stop tonight.
I think we need to move on.
Let's move on.
Yeah,
let's do it.
Let's
do DVD on. I guess I'm going to go quickly. I want to talk about two projects that I kind of orbited the documentary idea, perhaps. A few years ago, the Great North Forest, which was an urban initiative in the South Tyneside and North Durham area. The Great North Forest was a regeneration of the urban fringe in those areas, and they were developing 62 square miles of land, post-industrial landscape in South Tyneside and North Durham. They had commissioned many times artists and craftspeople to make artworks, sculptures, waymarkers, etc. Things like totem poles for walkway markers, things like that. But this film that I made, the Views of Views project, was the first animation that they commissioned. And what happened was we were commissioned to look around the sites and respond to them in some way. And I guess that's kind of what we're really talking about. It's about finding ourselves in an environment of some kind and responding to it. And there was a poet, a guy called Kevin Wallander, who spoke to local people, and they created a kind of a poetry project, and we kind of responded to that a little bit as well. We went to the different sites, a place called Tile Sheds, and etc. We looked at it, we drew pictures. I've got the PowerPoint. I'll just quickly rush through this. There we are. What we did, myself and my filmmaking partner and wife, down in Jefferson. We looked at the areas and we did drawings and we did sketches and photographs, etc. And we kind of basically just tried to penetrate the surface of that area, I suppose. I also want to talk a little bit about a project that I'm working on at the minute, which began as a kind of a conventional documentary about the American maverick outsider composer Harry Partch, and how it's slowly turned into something very different, and that its connotations about the meaning of Partch's work and his ethos are kind of personified by my actual production methodology rather than the actual content of the work, which if I've got time to show some of the initial tests that we played with. So that's the Harry Partch one. Let's just talk a little bit about views of views. The Views of Views project sort of explore the perceptual views of the changing landscape. The Great North Forest is now defunct. They don't fund it anymore, so it's a Great North Wilderness now. Yeah, that's what it is. But what I've got here is a couple of, I'll just go through that, a couple of the production sketches that I did where we were responding specifically to the landscape, and I wonder whether or not, the storyboard, I wonder whether or not that what we would kind of do, what the film itself is perhaps more a response to the production sketches in a way. This notion of a kind of a secondary response to the material itself. And it was interesting just to stick something in from what we were listening to earlier in the Hunter Lecture Theatre. Yes. Somebody was talking about perhaps some of the discourses that surround fine art and the notions of documenting in drawing should be brought into these discussions instead of perhaps our discussions about their connection to film instead. But here we go. This is a bit of the storyboard there. I shall attempt now to play a bit of this film so that you can see what it's like. This is the film that I'm about to show you, the Views of Views film, which I ended up calling Speed of Life, because I was listening to a lot of David Bowie at the time. Yeah, this is the best album. Well, anyway, don't worry. Yeah, here it is. Stick it in here.
Are we playing DVDs from the computer?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
There's also that other thing on that we
Yes. Again, part of the look of this film was shot on 16mm film on a beautiful Nielsen Hotel Junior Rostrum camera. Remember them? Remember them? Lovely. You remember that? Hey? Remember that? You young'uns. And the film grain is partly an attempt to try and conjure up the thought of the public information films of the 1970s, which are quite nice. That's it, number one. Play. Oh. It's going to be worth it. That's it. There it is. Look, the film. That's all right. I'll put that. Don't worry about the work you're operating in. It's health and safety.
Gone mad.
know you want to see the end. I know you want to see the end, but not that time. Yes, please. So there's just some more drawings from it there. The next thing I was talking about was the thing that kind of worked. Don't need that rubbish. Get rid of that. I haven't got time for it. Let's talk a little bit about the Harry Parch thing that I've been working on for quite some time. Started out as a normal sort of documentary about it, but in the end, what I've it was transmuted into is a kind of equivalent to what he did. He was a composer in the middle half of the last century who rejected all Western notions of music composition. He invented his own musical scale, and also because he did that, he had to create his own instruments as well. So he is probably most famous for his bizarre and esoteric instrumentarium, the master marimba and the diamond marimba and things like this, and the blowboy, things like that. Roll of the blowboy, of course, created by a huge bellows and a car horn, but created from detritus and junk. In essence, he rejected the mainstream completely. His work was unable to enter into repertoires, etc., because of the instruments. And I guess what I was interested in playing around with Harry Parch was actually finding some kind of visual equivalent for his ethos, his heterodoxy, by kind of creating my own kind of optical devices instead of using After Effects or something like that, using pre-cinema techniques like the Pepper's Ghost trick and mirrors and things like that, which I was quite interested in. I've got a few tiny little clips which will only take a few minutes. But another thing that we were just talking about, which is also what kind of provokes these works, is that Andy and I were talking that really sometimes the work kind of suggests itself as well, which is why there's this kind of blurring of the margins, I think. Sometimes you have to reject certain elements of the work and follow what it tells you to do. So that's possibly some reason why sometimes the edges are so difficult to define. Or it might even be as basic as something like in the Speed of Life film, it was about the landscape, but one thing I can't draw is landscapes, so I'm trying not to put that trees in it or leaves, anything like that, and kept with the industrial stuff, which I'm quite happy with. So these things kind of suggest themselves, and that's it. Well, yeah, the Parch stuff basically is image streams and stills, just frame by frame. But we haven't got any time to see it. I haven't got any time. But I'm sure you'll find Harry Parch somewhere, so you can find out about that there. So that'll do then. We'll wrap it up there, I think. Have you got anything else to say?
No.
Oh, well, that's us then. Okay.
various technical hiccups. But moving swiftly on to Jonathan Hodgson, who is our last speaker today.
Sunday morning, row, and it's about the usual thorny subject, sex. If you don't have sex with me, you are going to be disappointed. You actually said that. Oh, I'm not disappointed. I'm sorry. You just said that 2 seconds ago. I'm trying to explain what I don't want. Right, quote, I'm disappointed that you are not interested in sex, and also I'm concerned that in addition, you're trying to push it under the carpet and you're not taking it seriously. The underlying issue is actually that it's whether you care or don't about it. I'm not a machine, alright? I can't just turn things on and turn things off.
How do you go about creating an animated documentary on using material that's ugly sounding as that and stop people from switching over to the other channel? That's the question that needs to be answered when documentary producer director Zach Beatty asked me to direct the animation for his film The Trouble with Love and Sex for BBC Two's Wonderland series. The film was about real people going to relate for relationship counselling, and it was to be the first full-length animated documentary on British TV. The contributors had agreed to share extremely painful personal information by using animation to preserve their anonymity. It was hoped that they might feel less self-conscious about expressing their feelings. Zach did a rough cut, first of all, derived from the video footage he'd shot, counselling sessions, interviews that he'd done with the contributors, and they'd also done video diaries. And the material was really powerful, moving, and at times quite dark. And I was actually quite concerned that the animation might fail to deliver with the same emotional intensity. This paper's describing how we kind of collaboratively, Zach and I, adapted this challenging content, reinventing it as animation, taking the voices of these people who were quite often very distraught and angry, and developing it into sympathetic animated characters in a film that's proved actually to be quite accessible and stimulating to a large audience. I had to prove that I was right for the job, so I was actually pitching for this job first of all. I'm going to show the first clip. This is a bit of sound that was given from another documentary, which I had to adapt. Do you remember our first Valentine?
Really?
David, do you know?
It was just before we went to get married. You don't remember?
No.
It must be for you, didn't I?
I really wouldn't remember.
So it's Valentine's Day. You'll say something romantic to me.
I love you. Stop telling me what to do and say.
Do you feel in control?
No, do you?
Okay, so now, while aspects of that film worked quite well, it was agreed that the characterisation was a bit harsh. Characters seemed quite unlikable. So I actually had to do another pitch. There was another director who I won't mention the name of who was also pitching at the time, and it was down to us too. This is the second pitch.
And my lack of libido, is it like
libido, yeah.
the swell in our relationship?
Don't know what it means,
I think it's that where I am now. Shared dreams, though.
Shared what?
Erotic dreams.
So that won me the job, and but in an effort to make the characterisation more benign, the film was bordering on a bit bland, we thought. Zach wants something more edgy, and we felt we needed to find a middle ground between the two. Whether we chose to admit it, or whether we as human beings choose to admit it or not, we're all instinctively predisposed to making judgments based on physical appearance and making comparisons between us and them. We distance ourselves from what feels difficult or unsettling, such as bad relationships. Possibly by concealing the identities of the contributors, we thought animated drawings might help the audience to suspend disapproval and circumvent prejudice and emotional baggage. But it's important to approach the animation treatments in a way that would allow maximum engagement and empathy. We started looking around what was being done in this area, and there were a few things that came to mind. We studied a few filmmakers' work to try and inform our creative process. This is Chris Landers' The Spine.
Why do you always let me down? Did you even think about paying the tax bill yesterday? Oh, don't worry. I paid it myself today. You just think that everything's wonderful. Why can't you stretch even a little? You're not listening.
Okay, so Oscar-winning Chris Landers' film, The Spine. A troubled couple going to a group therapy session, and she wants to show ordinary people with common problems, but we felt that the film's grotesque characterization sort of created a psychological barrier, making it hard to identify and empathize with the protagonists. So another thing that we looked at, obviously,
a really smart 18-year-old to me. I never thought you could become a fighter. To be honest with you, fighting was more important to me for, let's call them, practical reasons. It seemed to me that everyone was getting laid, and I was a nerd good for nothing but chess and mathematics.
Okay, so Walter Bashir, it's a pivotal documentary. I'm sure everyone here has seen it, so I don't need to say too much about it. It was inspired by, the look of it was inspired by graphic novels, and the script performed by actors, written by the script by Ari Folman. Impressive as it is, we thought this was a meticulously stylized quest for lost memories. We felt to get a deeper emotional impact, we need the authenticity of real documentary sound and a much simpler approach to the animation. Other than animation, everyone would say to us, is it going to be like Creature Comforts? And these films are brilliant and really engaging, but it would have been totally inappropriate to have our contributors bearing their souls while sort of masquerading as penguins or armadillos. So we looked deeper and back into Arden's back catalogue, and really impressed by the lip sync series that they did in the 80s. And here's a clip from Peter Lord's Going Equipped, which
I think there were 6 of us. Just the father was very good. Very poor. I can't remember things. Poor, definitely. Realising money was the thing. I can really remember no affection in the family. I'd get persecuted for anything at all that went wrong.
So, we were really impressed by that. There's nothing in the animation process that kind of interfered with the clarity of what was being said, and the method felt much closer to what we were trying to achieve. So when considering how to communicate difficult materials, subtlety and restraint seem to be the best method, but these qualities are not always valued in animation. There's a common expectation that animation should be there to make people laugh or to blow people's minds, and audiences that come to expect sensation, showmanship, visually thrilling imagery, and the experience of watching animation can for me anyway, sometimes feels a bit like going to a noisy firework display, and you have to kind of stand back to kind of take in the spectacle. We wanted to go the other way. We wanted the audience to come in close, to concentrate on the finer detail, the subtleties and nuances of body language that are often overlooked in favour of more expansive cartoon gestures. I was inspired by the minimalist animation of Don Hertzfeld, whose sometimes virtually inanimate stickmen managed to communicate the depth of feeling and meaning, often lacking in many more assiduous animated characters.
The next morning, Bill actually felt pretty good. The day after that, he felt even better. Then he felt a lot worse. But the following day, Bill felt just fine. "I'm sorry, I just don't know what to make of it," his doctor said. Maybe Bill's body is simply rallying before finally giving up. His uncle, whom Bill had not even noticed in the room, had taken a lot of time off work to fly in all the way from Tulsa. He looked vaguely annoyed. After another 2 days, they concluded Bill was not going to die, so his mother had all the flowers removed from his room.
But by simplifying and underplaying the acting, we hope to construct a quiet and uncomplicated animation style that would help draw the audience in. So from studying films like Waltz with Bashir and Spine, I knew that we should definitely avoid a style that was too ornate or gothic. The characters were rendered in too much detail. The audience could become distracted by appearance and concentrate less on what was being said. So we decided to keep things simple. This would streamline the production process as well, which was important because it was really low budget. We chose to avoid stereotypes or caricatures, instead searching for archetypes that people easily identify with. The characters need to be appealing but not too beautiful, familiar without being too mundane, and characterful without being too eccentric or strange. Quite a tall order for, for me. I've spent my life trying to almost like bring out people's worst points. This is one of my early sketches that got rejected. But we had a big responsibility to the contributors. Obviously they're going through a lot at the time, and they're generous enough to reveal things that most people want to keep hidden. We didn't want to ridicule them by representing them. We kind of wanted to represent them as normal and likeable people, and I hope that would help the audience to feel sympathy for them. The process of finding the right animated characters was quite haphazard and fraught. This character, Dave, he was a complex character, a handsome and engaging man in his 40s. He was paralysed with low self-esteem and major obstacle to finding a relationship. He was a decent and sensitive bloke, so it was essential that he didn't come across strange or creepy. I went through all these dozens and dozens of, this is just some of them, but different types. Some, initially based on friends, family, some from imagination. None of them really worked. I tried TV presenters, models, random people from the internet, until gradually, I started sketching on the tube, and this guy here started to work, and this became Dave, almost randomly. It was kind of, he looked nothing like the real Dave, and we didn't want him to, but it turned out his voice matched perfectly. So having nailed the characters, the next challenge was to make them move. The animators commenced work, employing a kind of less is more approach. In the first few seconds of animation, as it rolled out, we knew we were definitely onto something.
Tell me a little bit, if you would, Ian, about employment at the moment and how that's affecting your career.
Well, okay. I'm not employed at the moment.
Right.
It's not working. The reason we've ended up at this point is largely financial, I think. A year and a half ago, we were basically heading for no income, no home, nothing. And Susan turned around and tried to, actually did initiate an affair with a chap who happened to be the richest bloke we knew in the area. So there was me, ended up with nothing, and Susan immediately prepared to try and jump ship.
Susan was following the money? Is that what you're saying?
Certainly felt there was an element of that.
I noticed how vigorously you were shaking your head there, Susan.
So, the characters, they had credibility and possibly empathy, but we were concerned that wall-to-wall talking heads were not going to sustain the audience's interest for 50 minutes. Keeping character animation simple meant other parts of the film kind of needed to be more dynamic. Exploiting animation's capacity to shift seamlessly through space, time, from one location to another. So we tried a few different things. Now and then the physical limitations of the consulting room needed to be liberated, so we used flashbacks to blur the boundaries between past and present. Here's a flashback.
Go back a bit further. I'm interested in your family. I mean, your dad and your mum. How did you get on?
My father didn't show me any affection at all when I was a kid. He never sort of grabbed hold of me and picked me up. He was really the nice, get a punch in the stomach or a slap or a half right at you.
So this is actually, you're going to be bruised afterwards.
Oh, he was intentional to hurt like that. Absolutely, yeah. And also he tried killing me once.
Funny.
Go on.
I was upstairs in my bedroom and he came up and had a go at me and he put a knife in my face. And he held me there. And I thought, well, this is gone. He removed the pillow after some time and sat in the bed and opened his arms up like that. Just sort of come to me. And I ran downstairs.
I've shown that before and people laugh. I find that quite weird, but it says it in quite an abrupt manner. So, fantasy sequences, shifting between the real and the imagined. It helps to create a sort of more multi-dimensional account of the contributors' stories.
Let's take a seat.
Thanks.
So, how have things been since we met last week? Just wondering.
Much worse.
Much worse?
Yeah, it's been really crap. I love Ian a lot, I love him very deeply. But sometimes I can't tolerate being in the same room as him and it's difficult. Ian will say, "You are the centre of my world." And I say, I feel sorry for the poor bastards on the edge of it then, because if this is what the centre feels like, I wonder what it feels like being on the edge of your world.
Dynamic tracking shots travelling through our animated characters' imagined town would transport the viewer from one location to the next, and also helps place the characters in a recognisable, incredible world. I've missed one. I've missed that one out. Anyway, I think I'm probably, am I getting to the end now? Yeah. So I'm just going to wind up with the last clip now. So at the start of the production, I was quite concerned that the viewers might not be able to register the understated nuances of body language, but the instinctive recognition that live action can facilitate. Luckily, my concerns were unfounded. The overwhelming response has been really positive from both press and the public. It's suggesting people have felt more engaged with the contributor stories, specifically because the stories were unfolding through the medium of animation. perhaps by filtering out trivial and distracting information which might otherwise obstruct and distort the real message. The rousing heartaches illustrated in this film can perhaps be seen not as a voyeuristic exploration of someone else's misery, but as an affirmation that there are universal truths in every relationship conflict that all of us can relate to and learn from. If there is time, I'd like to just show one more clip. This one, I'd like to go back. And this is like a happy
The thing that's changed for us is just being able to talk to each other. I'm having this chat now, we never get the opportunity, we're talking to each other all the time.
We're having champagne cocktails, and we used to do that before the children come along. And I'm actually really almost embarrassed by how much I'm looking forward to spending time with you. It feels like a long time since I felt like this. We are both so excited. I was going to Google champagne cocktails and beat me to it.
Yeah. And that just went even better than we'd hoped for, really. It was in a bar together, got drunk together. Well, it was like going on a first date after 18 years.
Make sure you do. So on the date night, should up the counts again. Now we figured that bit out for ourselves.
This is going to become a regular Friday night.
Lovely.
Lovely. It was sound really nice.
It's certainly a shot and it's a sequence that I can relate to a lot. And that's it really, I guess. That's me done.
Okay, we've run a little bit over, but we have the break for tea anyway, so maybe we'll just have like 5, 10 how many questions we have, so Alice can come. So, any questions? Yeah, David.
I address this to Jonathan because you're the one who's working on it. Is this a television series or just
a one-off video?
But it seems like a fairly complex production, and you've got a whole production staff working under you. I mean,
Yeah, we've had a team of 5 main animators, but lots of other people helping. It's probably about between 15 and 20 people who worked on it overall, not all at the same time. But it's for BBC documentaries, it's kind of quite a major budget, but pretty low for animation actually.
how do the animators feel about working on documentary animation, or is that something that they've done before?
Well, they were really into it actually. No, they were really excited by it. I think most of them felt that it was nice to do something with a bit more of a serious point.
Paul?
It's a question for everyone, but it came out of the end of Sam's talk where you cited Chira saying about the complexity of dealing with the participants, but also one's identity as a filmmaker and the desire to, I think it was something along the lines of in the edit, creating clarity for the audience or authenticity for the participant. And I wonder, really, it's a question for all of you on the basis of how you reconcile your roles as, shall we say, as artists with your responsibility to the people that you are representing in the films.
I think it's really difficult
because I think it's not really how you see yourself when you're an animator. You're used to kind of like putting your entirely your own vision, and certainly in the collaborative kind of element I'm talking about, where the collaboration is as visual as it is audio, then you do become more of a facilitator than an artist. If someone has a synesthetic response and it's a particular way, I can't change their response to make it more, TV friendly or screen, sort of better, sort of like make it better out of frame. So you have to kind of supplement that part of yourself in a way in order to tell the story better. But then I suppose our role as directors to a certain extent is about that anyway, isn't it? Because you're balancing the artist that you are, along with many animators are animator directors, and you're balancing the artist of doing animation with the fact that you've got to kind of like draw lines in.
Well, I was just going to say, I've touched on it lately in my speedy talk, is that I feel a huge responsibility to whatever subject I'm doing, whether it's, especially when it's a person. The first example with New Shoes is that I had to really put myself on the line, and of course the subject is absolutely part of the conversation the whole time the film's being made. And for, I was Child of Holocaust Survivors, which is showing here, is I wasn't allowed to talk to her niece, who was at the entire time the film was being made, and which just killed me, because she's an artist. I'm not just doing her life story. I'm not coming along and saying, oh, be great, I'll make a film about you. It's that I'm taking what she's already created, her art piece, and I'm altering it and making another one. And so, for me, I was just scared shitless the whole time. And at the end of it, she liked it enough that she was willing to narrate the film, and and sort of, there's a value-added DVD, so now she's done interviews about the whole process and everything, but it was, I couldn't have, I could not have made it if she wasn't absolutely, even though she wasn't a collaborator, that she didn't feel that her sensibility had been honored the whole way through. The producers felt that, because Bernice is quite a strong, she has quite a strong vision herself, they wanted the film to be something else, right? They wanted to allow that space. But my instinct was immediately to go to her, right? In fact, we were allowed to meet and talk, but not talk about the film. It was really crazy, But in the end, it worked.
I mean, I've worked in commercials. I've worked on art. I don't really like using the word art much, but I mean, I've worked on personal films, and I've worked on I've done like virtually everything. Actually, worked on children's series, Charlie and Lola and stuff. But for me, it's just a job. Whatever I'm doing, it's just a job, and I don't really make much differentiation. Actually, I just kind of, you've just got to do it, make it communicate as well as possible, do whatever you have to do. I don't really think of it as like I'm compromising on a thing with any job, really, whether it's a commercial or art film.
Well, strange, when we made the Speed of Life film, we didn't actually listen to what anybody said about it in terms of the people who were talking to the poet, because we weren't involved in that discussion. It's strange, as it turned out, that some of the things that they talked about in their discussions were the same things that struck us at the same time. So that's really about it on that level. Other than that, I usually just make things up. So.
And I just think like everything that you do informs everything else. So I've learned a lot from doing commercials that have fed into personal stuff and vice versa, and it's all part of a big sort of mix of ideas and styles and things. And there isn't really it's really hard to kind of differentiate when you draw a line between one thing and another.
Well, I'm not quite sure whether I'm on the same wave, but it's just, it just all comes down to power, right? And making images and who's making images of who, and I know that I'm very conscious of not having, I don't like any documentation of myself you know, I don't want anybody speaking for me. I don't want anybody representing me. I hate that this is being videotaped. And so I guess my own self-consciousness makes me so, you know, so aware of my responsibility to subject matter, I guess.
Any final question?
One very brief question for Jonathan. I mean, again, you mentioned that the budget was fairly constrained with the BBC, and I was just wondering how much that affects or influences his creative decisions in terms of design.
Totally. I mean, I could have talked for an hour about just that, really. But well, we just started out working, and when I talked about Don Hertzfeld, the minimalism of his work, I thought, well, you can do something meaningful and make it very minimal at the same time. So we kind of started with that approach, and as the animators got faster and faster at what they were doing, we could actually put a little bit more into it. But it was, we thought right from the start, less is more, less is more. And if we got time at the end, we'll add a bit more to it. And that's so. But I mean, to be honest, if we'd had 5 times the budget, I wouldn't have done it an awful lot different, because I think it kind of works pretty well for what I wanted at the end anyway. So, you know, having a big budget isn't everything. It can be a kiss of death sometimes.
Okay, please join me in thanking. Sorry I have to shivvy everyone along. I was a bit trying to test how much everyone has to say, so we can continue out.